Hello and welcome to a new episode of On Air with Daikin. I'm Matteo Dalombra, your host, and today I'm joined by a very special guest. I have with me Dr. Zoe De Grusa, CIBSE Research Manager. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you very much for having me
No,
today.
it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you. Um, I don't normally do this, but I think I like to start with a very terrible joke just to set the tone, because we'll be talking about shading and overeating and things like that. My surname literally translates to from the shadow, so I think like the team of today, they were literally at my name on it.
Well, I think that means that you should be the expert.
Yeah, I guess so. And uh, and now for the five people that are left listening and watching to to the show after the terrible joke, I think we can actually get started. And normally, what I always do with all my guests is get them to introduce themselves a bit, just to give us a bit on their background, how they stumbled into the industry, and essentially what was the journey within within the industry that led them to essentially where they are now. So, if you don't mind giving us a bit of
Yeah.
an insight.
Yeah, it was a definitely stumble kind of sums it up a bit, really. So I originally started, so at university I did engineering product design. And in my, I suppose, through that course, I was really interested in human factors. So it was essentially about product design. So we did lighting design, understood about human behavior, human interaction with products, and human factors, what really impacts like how products are designed and how they work with people. And towards the end of my undergrad, I was really interested in sustainability. We had a module on life cycle assessment, and understanding how the way that we design products actually has an impact on how they are disassembled, recycled, what happens to them at end of life. So at the end of my undergrad, I ended up deciding to stay on and doing a PhD. And I was offered the opportunity to be part of a sponsored PhD program with the British Blinds and Shutters Association. And the brief there was pretty open. They just wanted to try and highlight the benefits of shading products.
Mm-hmm.
And shading products, I didn't realise they were so diverse and so varied and so interesting, 'cause they really impact people in multiple different ways. So I found that element really interesting. And one of the interesting aspects that I got involved in was the effect of shading products on overheating within
Right.
buildings. And then this led me to the community at CIBSE via the CIBSE Technical Symposium. And whilst I was doing my PhD, I became part of that group of people really interested in overheating, looking at the effects of overheating on homes in the UK, and ended up meeting Anastasia Malona, who I know you had on the last
Yes. Yeah,
podcast
few episodes ago.
few
So
episodes
definitely go
ago.
and check out that episode if you're interested.
Yeah. So once I finished my PhD, she asked if I'd be interested in working with CIBSE,
Mm-hmm.
and I was really excited about the opportunity.
And here you are.
And here I am.
That's very nice. And yeah, I mean, overeating is. I wouldn't even know where to start as like to tackle the topic in a sense, given how big it is. As you said, like the massive impact that it has on people's lives, because we, as human beings, we spend our life inside buildings, I guess, for the vast majority of our lives. Fortunately, unfortunately, depending on depending on what's the view and depending on what's the building that you are stacking to. So yeah, having like the idea of walking into some place and be comfortable for the duration of the time that you are in that place, it's a massive element, I
Yeah,
would think.
certainly. I mean, during the time that I was doing my PhD, it was when the UK Health and Wellbeing, the UK Health and Wellbeing Council, they were coming out with the impacts of like balancing health and well-being against energy efficiency, and
Okay.
trying to say that if you invest in people's health and well-being and making buildings comfortable, you'll get better productivity returns. So there's a better business case for investing in that and making buildings comfortable, optimize them for their productivity benefits, because that is actually a greater financial incentive for companies than investing in energy saving measures.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess it seems logical that if people are comfortable, then they will perform whatever tasks they need to perform in a better way compared to if they're not comfortable to begin with. But do you find it as because you talk about also the product side of things that you've done in the past. Have you ever sort of find yourself in a situation where you need to fight between a product doing the job versus just looking nice when it comes, especially to like interior design, and sometimes even in from an air conditioning side point of view, sometimes, and I think more often than not in recent years, we do get like the brief is it needs to look good first, and then
Yeah,
people
of
start to worry
course.
about actually how he's going to perform, if he's actually going to do the job.
I mean, internal blinds are a case in point. They're generally looked at as it's a furnishing.
Yeah,
It's something that looks decorative at the
yeah,
window, not thought of in the way that it can help stop overheating. It can still help drafts around the window in the wintertime and stop thermal loss.
yeah,
It controls visual comfort.
yeah.
It attenuates light when it's extended, depending on how it's tilted, all those different options. Privacy,
Mm-hmm.
noise constraints as well.
Yeah,
So it's such a complex product, and there's obviously kind of like pros and cons to going with one type of specification versus another.
yeah. No, of course, and that's something else that when we started to put some of the topics together for the episode, and we were talking about sort of shadings and things like that, um, that you did mention, and that make me think immediately of where I'm from originally, which is Italy. Um, Such a stark contrast between the UK and Italy in terms of the fact that here tend to be everything inside the building, and in Italy and I guess in some other southern country Europe, everything is outside.
Definitely, yeah. I was in Milan earlier this year, just so in the north of Italy, and even there where it's not
Hmm.
super hot compared to the
Yeah,
south, but external shading is commonplace, and it comes in a variety of forms.
hmm,
It's kind of standard within the build.
yeah. I'll tell
Um,
you one of the biggest shock. Well, maybe not the biggest shock, but moving to the UK and windows open outside. Said,
yes,
what is this craziness? Why doesn't it open inside so I can have shading outside? And then
exactly. One of the biggest barriers to installing external shading in the UK is the fact that they open outwards. Um, but even though there's that barrier,
hmm,
there are lots of different solutions
hmm,
available. So you have awnings that extend outwards. Also have what is it drop arm awnings that they kind of go down parallel with the window and then they kick out at the bottom.
right,
So it still allows for windows to be
yep,
opened. The I was going to mention the Good Homes Alliance shading guide has great case studies across lots of different shading products that I was part of. So that's really worth having a look at to see like the variety of products that are available, and they're all kind of scored in terms of their benefits for overheating,
hmm,
maintenance, so you can get a real idea of the pros and cons to installing
yeah.
different
And
products.
we'll put all the links to all these resources in the episode description. So if you want to read more after you hear the episodes, then it will be there for you to wait. Um, do you think, is there a desire to change? Things will change in terms of uh, like the clear direction of saying, for example, in the UK, the vast majority of the shading happen inside versus outside, for example. Is that something that you think is going to change? Is there a drive to change? Is there a clear benefit
Yeah,
to change?
definitely with the introduction of Part O,
Okay.
which now like kind of suggests that external shading could be used in the dynamic method for assessing overheating risk in homes. That's definitely helping incentivize external shading, but I would say there's still quite a lot of barriers.
Hmm.
For example, we mentioned about windows opening, but also fire regs, given Grenfell,
Right.
has meant that they're that on. So that Part B, the standards say that buildings of a certain height, I think it's 8 floors, can't have. Basically, means that external shading can't be installed
Right.
because they're their fabrics or potentially the coatings on like Venetian blinds, external Venetians won't meet the classification criteria for fire. And
Right.
although
Okay.
that's only should be applied to only buildings of a certain height, there's that kind of
if it works for them, it works for everything else.
Everyone's kind of applying it to
Yeah.
everything in external buildings, which is such a shame because, like you said, we go abroad and we see external shading is everywhere, and people find creative ways of externally shading their buildings.
Let's leave it to the Italian to find a creative solution to a problem. That's not a problem.
But no, I suppose it's like also we want to make, in the nicer weather, we want to make good use of our outdoor areas.
Absolutely.
And bring the outside in and all those kinds of things. So, yeah.
Yeah. And you did mention sort of Parto for the uninitiated, and maybe for the benefit of the listener that might not be super familiar with what Parto is. Can you give us a bit of a breakdown of what it is, what it stands for, what it's trying to achieve, where you might see it in practice applied to buildings?
Yeah. So Part O was introduced in 2022.
Yep.
So it's relatively new. And it means that for building regs, an overheating risk assessment has to be done for all new domestic buildings. It also covers other typologies, but do check the standards. So student accommodation, I think some healthcare types are also considered within that as well, such as care homes.
Yeah.
And essentially, an overheating risk assessment, which leans on, and there are two routes to that. There's a simplified route, which is explained within the standard, and there's also a dynamic thermal modelling route to do that, which leans on TM59. There are differences between TM59, the 2017 publication, and then what is in Part O. So it's important to note that there are differences. They are not one and the same.
Right.
But essentially, the idea within Part O is that it tries to prioritise passive measures, make sure that designers do that risk assessment to assess overheating risk and have the right mitigation methods, whether it be increasing the opening area of windows, so it allows for better ventilation, or if it's installing external or internal or potentially internal shutters, which are also included.
So fundamentally, I guess another way of saying it is that it forces whoever designed the building to think about the entire building.
Yeah.
In conjunction with where it's going to be located, what the impact is going to be on like the local weather, but essentially making sure that everything that will then go into the building is designed all together to work together and deliver a proper building that can deliver a nice climate without external sort of additional type of system, shall we say.
And one of the challenging things I suppose that has come out of Part O is like it also incorporates, and quite correctly, the consideration of noise constraints. So that has an impact on how likely a person is able to open windows, how practical that is, particularly at night time when we want to be able to sleep comfortably.
Yeah, of course.
And noise constraints can be a massive issue.
So within the standard, within the Part O standard, is there what was the biggest change within the standard, shall we say, compared to how things were addressed before the existence of Part O? Was there any specific area that was looked at, or it was just the entire thing from?
Well, I suppose Part O didn't exist. So there was no real requirement other than what local authorities required at the planning stage. So the Greater London Authority, a prime example, they adopted TM59. So TM59 was published in 2017. And not long after, they adopted TM59, as in they required designers to do a overheating risk assessment per TM59 at the planning stage. But there was no other mechanism. Now we have local authorities also requesting TM59, but also the backstop that Part O requires it.
Yeah. So I guess before it would also be more, the approach would have been more fragmented. Like maybe different local authorities would have dictated different rules, and so you end up with all sort of different things going on at the same time.
Overheating not being considered in certain areas where it possibly is. So, for example, Part O highlights not only London but also Manchester, And there's one other city location, and I can't remember what it is off the top of my head.
Okay.
Also have
A
to.
challenge for the listener: go and find the other city that is mentioning part to put in the comments, and we'll see if we got it right.
Yeah, they're considered high risk locations.
Right.
So when it comes to the simplified route, they have to go have different constraints within the building
Right.
design.
I guess big cities, that, as you said, they also have the increased challenge of maybe noise pollutions and things like that you may not necessarily have in other parts of the
And also,
of the country.
I suppose they're warmer. The climate in those
Yeah,
urban areas is warmer than outside areas.
true. And it's definitely needed. I think sort of a standard, very clear blanket approach, because I'm also how can I say, kind of living in sort of directly this kind of overeating issue, because we live in a recently, it's, 5 years old, the house where we
Hmm.
live. And I know it's only like 2 or 3 weeks during the year, because unfortunately the weather in this country is not always the fairest, but whatever. But in those 2 or 3 weeks, you end up in a situation where inside the temperatures is higher than outside, which seems crazy to me that you could be in that situation. And I don't know, even if you stand outside in the garden or in the front of the house, close to the brick walls, like you feel
That
cold.
radiative
Yep.
heat, yeah.
You,
Particularly if you've got patio right
yes.
outside your
Yeah.
doorstep, and nothing shading that.
You live inside a giant radiator, basically.
Yeah, so there are quick wins as well to like keeping your home cool, like closing windows when it's hotter outside than it is inside. All those kind of little tips, trying to shade those, like that patio area, those hard surfaces. Not only just your windows, but also the surrounding area, or greening. Greening is a great way of avoiding
Yeah.
that.
Fair enough. It'd be nice to have, how's it called? Ivy? No, the one that grows.
Yeah, some nice climbers up the
Yes.
wall.
Yeah. Yeah, you see sometimes some of them out in the countryside. I never know when they started, because some of those plants seem they've been around for like centuries. So I always said, yeah, we should start it, but maybe we'll be not around by the time he
What?
actually is able to do something, something for the house. But
Yeah.
it's a nice thought to have. So then in your in your studies and in your work, do you look a lot at what other countries are doing and trying to, I don't know if there's anything that can be learned from other places of Europe that can be imported within the UK? Is this something that it's done as a practice, or not
Yeah.
really?
Yes, I suppose we know that already. Like our counterparts across Europe are a lot better at doing it. Not only the hotter countries, but also the cooler countries. So
Mm-hmm.
Germany has a like I wouldn't say identical climate to us, but similar. They
Yeah.
have their cold areas, and I suppose what I've noticed is that particularly when it comes to shading, there are kind of tax incentives. There are a bit more incentives to
Right.
install, and a bit more recognition of the benefits
Mm-hmm.
in terms of not only like thermal losses, but also and thermal gains that shading provides. So yes, I think those around us are probably better at it, and it's very much more of a cultural thing, like you said. Maybe that feeling that we only really have hot weather for 4 weeks of the year is a really common argument for not
Mm-hmm.
not integrating adaptation measures early on. But I think the extremes and our climate projections are showing that it is getting warmer, and we've had heat waves of 40 degrees more regularly over the last decade. So it's a case of that we do need to make sure that we have the tools,
Mm-hmm.
and also our buildings are designed in a way that they can adapt to the changing climate.
Yeah, no, of course. And that kind of leads very nicely into the other topic that I wanted to talk about, which is weather data and how that's changed. Because yes, I remember when I first came into the UK 14 years ago. Yes, it was a week during the summer, then it became 2, 3. Like now, those sort of heat waves and heat spells are extending to almost be proper full season, which is nice to have in a sense. But it's certainly, hey, you feel the difference, and B, so then it's something that as an industry, I guess we need to address more and more, not just an afterthought, but something that it's defined right at the very beginning of the inception of a new building or a major refurbishment process of an existing building. So we spoke when Anastasia was here. We talked very briefly about the weather data because they were just being recently published. But let's dive deep into that, into the topic, if you wish. So again, for the benefit of the listener, maybe they have not listened to the other episodes. So what are the weather data, the weather files data that CIBSE provides?
Okay, so CIBSE provide two main types of weather data:
Okay.
TRYs, which are test reference years, and DSYs, which are design summer years. TRYs are used for energy assessments. They represent an average year.
Right.
And we have, in the new release of CIBSE weather files, we now have 28 zones, and there's a weather file, a TRY file for each of those zones.
So by zone, I guess you mean geographical areas.
Yes. So we've split. So previously we only had, so in the 2016 issue, we only had 14 to 16 weather files across the UK.
Right.
And they represented specific locations.
Okay.
So, for example, the ones that are most commonly known is like London Heathrow, Gatwick, and City of London. So we had 3 files that kind of covered that London area.
Right.
And then we also had Norwich, Swindon, and there were specific locations. And the issue that we had was that people were selecting which weather file that they should use based on the distance they are from those weather stations, and not based on the climate that weather file represented. Does that make sense?
I guess. Yes. I see what you mean.
So like there are certain areas where there are like certain locations that were selected, and because it was a certain distance away, it may not be as representative of the location that their building was being designed in. So what we've done is to remove that variability in the selection of which weather file to use. We've created these 28 zones, and they're climate zones, so they're representative of that climate within that zone.
Right.
So now there's an online.
So you can be more hyper specific in a sense.
Yeah, and it's more that the fact that the weather data file that you'll be using is more representative of what is happening in that location.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we now have a weather data tool online where you could go in, put your postcode in, or put the longitude and latitude of your site, and it will pinpoint exactly where you are, tell you what zone weather file that you need to use. There's less ambiguity between people doing assessments.
Right. So there's also been more guidance from CIBSE point of view in terms of saying you should really be selecting the specific data set because of where you are, because of the new studies. Are they free to access? Do you need to be a CIBSE member? How someone would get hold of these?
They're not free to access. So the best way is to go to the CIBSE website, look at weather data, CIBSE weather data. If you Google it, it will come up. And there's a link to the weather data tool. And through that tool, you can select your weather file and also purchase it. So there is a fee to the weather files because it is a research project. So the creation of the weather files stems from a collaboration with University of Exeter. And also Loughborough University have helped us test them for the 2025 weather data set. And also, I should mention, industry participants who have helped us look at the testing results, evaluate them on different building designs, and assess like they're appropriate. We haven't missed anything. There are no anomalies or anything that doesn't make sense.
So how does one create a weather file?
So I'm not the expert on this.
Okay. I'm just interested in the process of what are the motions, let's say, what are the steps, like in just very generic terms, of course, but how do you get to, and this is it?
Yeah, so I've kind of loosely explained that we've created these zones. So that was one piece of work. It's breaking down the UK based on historical weather data and working out what the climate trends are and statistically analysing based on some of the key variables that help us to determine like
Yeah.
how our buildings will respond, so temperature, solar radiation. So that broke down the UK into these 28 zones. So that was one part of the work for the new set. The other part is the methodology that University of Exeter have helped produce, which is where we create a baseline file. So, and this baseline file is based off 30 years worth of historical data.
Right.
So measured at all the different weather stations across the UK, which helps us understand climate trends. And then we, so for the TRYs, the test reference year files that are used for energy assessment, we select an average month from each of those, from all the Januaries within that 30 years, and then stitch the file together. So we have an average January, an average February,
Right.
and we do that for all the different site locations.
But then,
And then,
go. Sorry.
and then we have the to create future files.
Oh, that was going to be my
Yeah.
question, because so far we've been talking about looking
That kind
at
of
the historic.
baseline. So
Yeah.
we start with that. We create our baseline, and then we have our UKCP climate projections, which are provided by the Met Office, which contain climate factors,
Right.
and then we apply those to that baseline year. So it's more or less similar for both TRYs or DSYs. The only difference is the TRYs, we select an average year. So we're selecting those average months, where for the DSYs, we're selecting years with return periods of hot events.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where it gets a bit more complicated, and I will defer to the
That's all right.
experts at the
That's
university.
okay.
But we have got, so within,
So is there a place where people can read more on?
yeah, so we've got a technical briefing,
Okay.
and it kind of gives an overview summary of how they're created, but it also links to the papers that back up the methodology that give more description to how they're produced.
Right. How far in the future are you looking? Is it a fair question or?
Yeah. So we provide the TRY and DSYs. For DSYs, we have 3 different file types. So there's DSY1, which is a warm year, DSY2, which is contains an intense heat wave event, and DSY3, which contains a longer duration heat wave event. And for all of those files, we provide 2030s weather files, which 2030s is a period. I don't have all the years, but it covers kind of like late 2020s to 2030s. 2050s and 2080s, and similarly they are, and I emphasize the S at the end of those. It's not, they don't represent 1 year, they represent a period.
Are we doomed? Will it be okay since you can look in 2080s?
Interestingly, like the new climate projections actually got a little bit cooler than the previous set. However, yeah, there is still that same trend. They're still overall getting warmer. But it's really hard to pinpoint, because not only that, like we have all those different timelines, we also have lots of different emission scenarios, because quite frankly, we don't know what how emissions are going to affect, what policy interventions are going to come into place that change our route. So we know that between now and 2030s, there's not too much difference between the different emission scenarios. But when we get to the 2050s and 2080s, there are massive differences between like the projections depending on the like RCP scenarios. So yeah, on the CIBSE website, we have a technical briefing, and it goes through all this. And we also have a lot of box plots that help show you how like the different RCP scenarios compare to one another between the 2030s, 2050s and 2080s. Right. So in CIBSE's release of the weather files, we have not released all of the different scenarios because that's quite overwhelming. There is a lot of files. We've selected the scenarios that are most different from one another.
Okay.
So I mean,
It's
the
almost
effort,
like you have the extreme,
the reason
essentially.
for having, the reason for having all these different scenarios is because the future is uncertain.
Of course.
The files are projections, not predictions.
Yeah.
And they should be used for a risk-based assessment.
Mm.
It's not the case that you can just select different timelines and go, right, that's what's going to happen. And this is what we need to say, like your building will be fine. It's not as straightforward as
No,
that.
of course. And I guess that's also where my next question was going to be, in terms of, I've got the file. Now, what do I do with them? Like, I'm a building designer, essentially. I'm an architect, I'm an engineer, I'm working on my building. I have this information. What do I infer from this information? How do I use it in a practical way?
So within TM59, it set like a file that needed to be used and suggested that other files should be used to create a risk-based approach. So we see like the DSY 1 2020's 50th percentile. That was kind of minimum baseline. It's the minimum, and it represents a warm year.
Okay.
Nothing extreme about it. It's a warm year.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you want to look into hotter events, then you need to start looking at the other files, the other RCP scenarios, and doing scenarios across them all. I think the challenge is that every building design will have different constraints depending on where it is. So it's hard to be prescriptive about, and also that every building has different risks depending on the occupancy.
Yeah.
So for example, hospitals, I always use the example of hospitals, like the ICU rooms, they have to be fail safe.
Yes.
So that requires like significant risk assessment. They should be looking at the higher extremes and going, right, our building has to withstand these constraints. Where with homes, there's a little bit more flexibility. And I think really and truly, we've like CIBSE are trying to do more research in this area, provide better guidance of of how to approach that. I think that's really needed.
Yes, no, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, if we really think about it, when like buildings are built to withstand a very, very long life, so you need to, and I think that's probably one of the most difficult element of any of this design, the idea that you need to account for the next 60 years of the life of this building, maybe even 80 years. In some cases, buildings have been up for centuries, and they need to withstand all of this. So I guess any help in terms of the information, the data, the modeling, the planning, it's just great to have as a resource to make sure that whatever it's built can continue to serve its life and its purpose. Because that's the other thing that we're starting to see quite a lot of, when we talk about embodied carbon and what embodied carbons are represented within a certain building. There's a huge difference and a big incentive in keeping the overall shell of the building going on into the future, and just try to sort of refurbish the interior, but not demolish and restart every other day, essentially. So the more we can make sure that those buildings are prepared and can withstand whatever.
So do you have a plan? So what is that future plan looking like? And also, like through the life of the building, that should be reevaluated and updated with the latest weather data files, climate projections. And I think the struggle for, I suppose, our members is that often they're only involved in the design of
the first time around.
Yeah. And then they may set that out, but there's no maintenance. I want to say like a maintenance contract, but it's not a maintenance. It's like a longevity of the building contract to go, all right, in 5 years' time, we'll come back and we'll reevaluate where we were on our plan. For example, so at the design stage, potentially you could model for the future scenario, say, right, in, I don't know, 15 years' time, we might need to incorporate mechanical cooling with a cooling coil in it, for instance. So we'll build that possibility within the design of the building. And then when that 15 years comes around, they reevaluate, work out if that's the best option, or if potentially something in the next 20 years is going to come up, and that would mean, no, we should we should plan for this instead.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. Like technology advances at such a pace that what you put in today, it's going to be good for a certain amount of time. But then once you evaluate in, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, you might also find that technology has completely changed and you are now able to develop and sort of provide a completely different solutions that can last maybe longer or can be more efficient and so on and so forth. So, and I think that's also where it's been nice to see a lot of changes, but a lot of new standards that are pushing and asking for that continuous monitoring and making sure that the building is not you set it and forget it and you move on, but you are continuously accountable in essence for what the performance of your building is into the future. It's you're asked to monitor, to make adjustment, to make sure that you are actually performing at the level that you said you were going to perform. So there is that level of accountability, which big change. And we've seen it again first party in terms of the amount of new data that we were asked to provide. But I think it's absolutely the right direction to go to make sure that that accountability carries on overall into the future.
It's just getting everyone else to buy into it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
It needs to be done, but how do you sell that to the client? I think that's the biggest challenge for industry. A lot of the time, like, we know what we'd like to do, but getting that across to the person that pays is a real challenge. And potentially it's about that communication of like, well, what do the weather files represent? What does that mean for my building? It withstands to what does that? And putting that in simpler terms.
True.
That would really help.
Yeah, the simpler term, I think that's really key. Like how do we retailer, how do we change the messaging, how do we actually speak to people so that we can engage with them, they understand they understand the reason why it's important to think about this thing and design building in a certain way. Yeah, that's definitely probably one of the biggest challenge, that communication piece, because especially nowadays you can just go on ChatGPT and you can get anything out of it. And how do we make sure that we can feed the right information into the systems as well, so it's surfaced in the right way and people are not sort of taking it down the wrong path or the wrong rabbit hole.
Yeah. And it's easy to see how things are misinterpreted. It's like with Part O coming into play, even though like within the text in there, it does incentivize passive measures first before mechanical cooling or mechanical measures, or I suppose before mechanical measures. But we have seen or heard, and like the evidence suggests that more mechanical cooling systems are being installed than we originally thought because of the noise constraints.
Right.
So it's that kind of interpretation. Is a bit of a worry. Even though the best intentions can be put in place, but not everyone will read it in the same way. So putting things in simple terms, that's what I'm trying to get at, is really important.
Yes.
So it's like, I think in Part O, the text around like that says around passive measures being incentivized before them, it's quite a way down the building regs. So it often gets overlooked. And then they look at, and then other measures are kind of used instead.
But the other thing, and yes, it's true what you say, but also what I always like to remind people in a sense that when I talk about sort of heat pump technologies and air conditioning and that kind of thing, also people shouldn't think of those products as the solution in and on itself, that you can just slap a pump at the building, job done.
Yeah.
Because if the system, the heat pump, whatever that might be, is not actually designed with the building in mind, you might actually create more problem than what you solve at the end of the day. So that's also something that sometimes get overlooked. Like people may jump the gun and say, well, I do this, I do that. Yeah, let's just put an air conditioning in there, it will be fine.
Yeah, no one technology is the panacea of everything.
Exactly.
And you need to and it's like with overheating in general, it's thinking like about passive measures first. It's a variety of passive measures that will ultimately lower cooling loads and keep them low for a longer time. So shading, better ventilation, the design of the building itself, like floor to ceiling heights, all those kinds of things. They all have
absolutely.
an impact.
But that goes back to what I always say, which is you need to think of the entire building and all the different aspects of the building. Because if you do that, if you do the right mix of maybe passive and active measure, well, guess what? You may be able to reduce and get way better performance out of the active measure because you've designed them to work together, not against passive measures. And that's where I say sometimes that people just say, well, it's very hot, just put an air conditioner and be done with it. And then people still say, oh, you might get noise complaints because, again, too big for the job that it's supposed to be doing, or it's not cold enough, it's not warm enough. And again, because the right assessment was not really done at the right time. When done sort of after, it never really works that well. So I think that's always the message that I try to sort of promote, which is no matter what it is that we're talking about, it's always like buildings come first in terms of truly understanding where it's going to go, the usage pattern, what you're trying to get off and out of the building. And only then you can start to go through all the different measures that you want to apply and have some level of success.
Yeah. The then challenge is then communicating it to the users. I'm hoping that they use it in the right way.
Yes.
That's why you need like these simple solutions.
That's true.
Because I think that's one of my big bugbears, particularly, is that relaying information to the homeowners or who ends up using that building, and also then the exchange of that information if they then leave and it goes somewhere else, because you can put all these systems in place, put in these plans that it will work, and then at the end of the day they just get either overridden, not used, or not used in the right way. And I think that's a big concern with like incorporating mechanical cooling systems early doors, is that they will be used all the time when they're not necessarily needed. And that's why like it's not only just installing that, but you also have those passive measures to and those have to be incentivized first.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, as you said, even a passive measure, you need to tell people how
to use it,
how they work, how you live with those measures.
When to extend. I remember trying to convince my neighbours of not opening their windows when it was really hot outside, and they're an elderly couple. They were not believing it at all. I told them what I did for a job, that I'm expert in overheating. I see their windows were wide open when it was 40 degrees outside, and I was just like, what are you doing?
The human factor is always where we fall.
Is at the end. Yeah, by far the most challenging thing is human behaviour themselves. They're so unpredictable. I had when I did my PhD study, I did a case study in an office. And one lady, she was great. She was like the office mum, I suppose. She would come in every morning and lower the blinds or raise the blinds for everyone. I think it was raise them in the morning because they were always down for security reasons at night. And so I was trying to evaluate, part of my project was to try and evaluate how people were like operating the system. Operating all the different blinds, and it was just railroaded by the fact that this lady came in, she opened all the blinds for everyone and set them at a default, and I was like, oh, okay. Where I think if she wasn't there, other people would have maybe opened them up like a quarter of the way, 3/4 of the way. So you have, it was just so interesting, like that characteristic, and so unpredictable as well, that I could have never factored in that would be the case.
Yeah, that's true. But still, things needs to be designed with a human factor in mind. Because at the end of the day, you can think on paper at the best, incredible solutions. And then if it doesn't translate into the real world, into actual real life application, then it's as good as not having it.
Yeah.
In a sense, I guess. Which is also, I think, one of the last point. The idea of how do you see sort of the translations of what you and your team are researching on, and how do you see the practical translations of that sort of research happening? Is it happening the right way? Is there still too big of a disconnect between what, I don't know, framework legislation are trying to achieve and what you see actually in the real world?
I suppose. Good question. So I suppose case in point, we've developed a new set of weather files, and
Yeah.
now it's kind of working. We're trying to work with policymakers to work out how we get that integrated quickly
Yeah.
into legislation, and it's a slow process.
Mhm.
Not only for us in terms of coming up with the evidence base for them, but also like the turnaround with being able to change building regs. I mean, it was only in 2022 we managed to get Part O, so
Yeah.
there's a long road before we get a change to that. But I know that work is being done, and we're working with those that provide building building certification schemes
Mhm.
to advise them on the new weather data so they get adopted. Speaking with local authorities as well, as that's originally how the weather files got adopted in the
Yeah.
first place. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess getting big organizations such as governments to do things quickly is probably not the easiest thing in the world. But
I
then I
mean,
guess it's also where it's nice to have seen things like the net zero carbon building standard, which is always a mouthful to pronounce, which kind of came from the other way, like it came from the industry.
yeah, and that's very
Because
much
of the industry wanted to do something different quickly, realizing there was a need and a gap. Let's act on it.
But that's also very much how Part O kind of came about as well. It's that TM59 got developed by industry, put out there. People started using it to assess overheating as a best practice example. It got adopted by local authorities because there was that great industry engagement, and then ended up resulting in a building reg.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the path that we need to go through. But I think there's a bit more this time round because there's a bit more recognition of it. We do have the policymakers coming and sitting to us and saying, "Oh, tell us about the weather files." Like, there's more of a conversation, but there's still that policy framework even above them that they have to go through with delays. There are other priorities, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's all right. But it's at least it's good that we have that industry push.
Yeah.
And as long as we have that one, then we'll still be, I
Yeah.
think.
I mean, industry is key
position.
to it all. They like everyone see, I suppose, a lot of people see CIBSE staff as the creators of everything, but we're not. It's our members. There's 20,000 of you. We can't do everything. I mean, as a CIBSE employee, we're here to support and nudge in the right direction and do our best to get your voice heard.
Speaking of that, since we're sort of closing to our time, how do, like, if people wanted to do the contribution, if they want to help, like, what would be the best way to, I don't know, get involved with CIBSE or do
so we
support
have lots of special interest groups. So
Okay.
go on the CIBSE website, look at special interest groups. You can always contact us directly as well. So technical@cibse.org. Depends what you're looking to find out. In terms of research, so I'm research manager. So we're always looking for opportunities to collaborate and co-fund projects potentially. So we work with a lot of industry and university partners on different research projects. There is a research activities page on the CIBSE website, so you can see what we're currently involved with.
So plenty of ways to get involved.
There's lots of ways. The SIGs are amazing. So they hold lots of events, different networking opportunities, but also it's a SIG's role is also to help us review, evaluate our current guidance and suggest new guidance projects or research projects. So we have knowledge and research projects, and on our website there are information about that. So you literally have to fill in an application form, tell us about your idea, and work with one of the staff members to develop that, to get that to our knowledge management committee to sign off, and then we can go with it.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Well, I think that's a nice place to leave it for today. Again, Zoe, thank you very much for your time and for coming in and having a chat about all things overeating.
Yeah,
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, we'll have all the links to all the elements, the documents, the website, how to get involved in the descriptions, both on YouTube and on the audio platform. So get subscribed if you're not. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.